Imagine predicting a supply chain disruption before it even happens. Tim reveals how AWS is turning this into reality for aerospace companies. In this segment, we're going to delve into the intricacies of aerospace supply chains and how our cloud technology is revolutionizing their management. Aerospace supply chains are among the most complex, involving numerous suppliers, stringent regulatory requirements, and the need for absolute precision. Tim is going to share how AWS is enabling greater visibility, traceability, and resilience in these supply chains. We'll explore real-world applications of cloud solutions that are transforming the way aerospace companies operate, ensuring they can adapt swiftly to disruptions and maintain operational excellence. So look, Tim, fantastic. Thanks for getting stuck back into this again. So like we said, we had a good introduction, good general conversation, but now we're going to go deep. So I really want to understand how our cloud technology is transforming aerospace supply chains. How does AWS enable greater resilience and efficiency in this sector?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think there's one real key issue in aerospace supply chain, and that's really trying to understand what are the risks in your supply chain, where is the potential disruption risk. So where an average OEM will have really tight relationships with all of its direct tier one suppliers. They'll know exactly who's feeding into their supply chain. That relationship starts to get more and more distance the further you go down into the supply chain, into the level of sub-tiers, and at what level of visibility do you have for that? And one of the biggest challenges for that is frankly just understanding who those sub-tiers are. So who are the suppliers of your supplier? And that data can be problematic because one, the volume of that data gets bigger and bigger as you move forward. Sometimes suppliers may view that as somewhat proprietary and may not want to disclose it, or the OEM may not have relationships with some of those suppliers. So one of the things we're working with customers now to look at is how do you take Gen AI and help you predict and provide proxy data where you may have imperfect visibility today. So again, we're not going to be able to say with 100% precision tomorrow who all of your third tier suppliers are. But imagine if you had a vehicle that would be able to unlock with 80% certainty that one of those suppliers might be somebody from one of the three companies on this list. And you were able to identify, okay, I know that one of those suppliers sits in the major wildfire corridor in California in November. So I need to reach out to them and understand, do they have a disaster recovery plan? Do they have inventory laid on things? Because we've seen this constantly over and over again, where one of the things that becomes challenging from a aerospace supply chain perspective is a small company that's deep embedded into the supply chain that the original order didn't know about, wasn't aware with, but would have been happy to either take action early on or invest in or whatever to make sure that supplier didn't have the type of disruption they were looking for before. So that's one of the I think, key and most exciting areas we're looking for. And then we're obviously doing a lot of the things that I'll say best practice supply chain companies do in terms of like helping companies establish supply chain control towers and use AI for predictive analytics around those types of fulfillment strategies and things like that for inventory.
All right, now I can't let you get away with two things you've just said there, two massive buzzwords. So I'll put you back on the spot. So here we are. We've got generative AI, every board, everywhere in the world. We all want to go and spend some money on a Gen AI project. We don't know what it is, but we just know that we need it because everybody else has got it, right? So there's a bit of fear of missing out. Now you've done something that a lot of people can't do, which is to put their finger on a immediate use case, that resonates strongly around the use of Gen AI. So maybe we can just touch it a little bit further. So for instance, we know that we can use generative AI to help with understanding the end-tier suppliers. And we know that we can use some of that to help with predicting the tariff risk. But the issue can be the data is still being generated from something. So how do you increase explainability, as it were, for that data so that these heavily regulated industries are able to use generative AI in a meaningful and safe way?
Yeah, that's a really important question right now because, as you said, there's a lot of companies experimenting with Gen AI and trying to figure out what they want to do with it. And a lot of them have done basic things like put a chatbot on top of an internal company-wide intranet to help people find internal answers to things like HR problems and things like that. And that's a relatively low-risk deployment of Gen AI. what companies start to get a little bit more nervous about is when you put Gen AI out on the direct production line, on things that are customer facing, things that may interact directly with the product itself. So the most important thing for us is when you're leveraging tools like Amazon Bedrock that have full capability for a host of publicly available models, or if you want to bring in your own LLM, you can anchor to that as well, is that we provide full transparency to what those data sources are. The model, you can ask the models to tell you what it's leveraged for the answer it's providing, and it will provide that right at the user screen. So that gives some reassurance to the user that it's not off using some questionable source and things like that. But more so even up front when we start to design the RAG architecture or whatever the approach we want to use for Gen AI, we want to anchor that in what are your data security standards, what are your data your proprietary data standards, so that it's only leveraging the data that you've allowed it to do. So for example, one of the other Gen AI tools that we've been working with a lot of aerospace customers today is a mechanics assistant. So again, one of the big challenges in supply chain right now is a lot of customers out there have just struggled to hire labor, particularly mechanics and touch labor and people who are working at the airplane itself. So you have a lot of new employees on the floor who may or may not be all that familiar with aerospace production. So what we've done is provided an environment that allows a mechanic, for example, to take a photograph of a part, put it into a Gen AI engine, and right there it will pull up a service bulletin record of everything that's been done to that part, recommended installation procedures, things like that. But you can see right there that this comes from this particular FAA service bulletin or this job instructions or the PLM data associated with that part, so that, again, that mechanic has clear visibility into what the source of the recommendation that's coming from Gen AI will allow them to do right there.
Nice. Another absolutely fantastic use case. I love that. Now, one common thing, though, you did say control tower, and I'm not going to ask you to give me a dictionary definition of it, but I am going to link control tower to generative AI to all of the other high-level supply chain things that we want to do. One of the common currencies is data. And of course, the usual scenario is that poor data in results in poor outcomes, whether it's your generative AI solutions or whether it is your control tower. So maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview, and it's okay to go 101 and then delve it in a little bit deeper. But why is data so absolutely critical to these sorts of strategies that we seek to employ?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think what we're seeing is a shift in mindset from where companies used to be very application focused. So they talk about, I'm driving my business out of SAP or Infor or Siemens or Dassault or whatever, to a much more data-centric world. So as opposed to worrying about what the application is that drives that, and all those transaction systems are still critically important, and we still need all those for sources of record, but it's how do we provide data at the point of use to the user, regardless of the source system, is really critically important. So when we start to look at any project, whether that be a Gen AI project or anything else, the first question has to be, what is the data strategy that the company has? So what are the policies they have in place around data cleansing, data management, data security, so that we need to make sure that we're, first of all, respecting and allow them to manage data that they want to from their own policy and procedure standpoint, which, like you said, in aerospace, sometimes are a lot more regulated than in other industries. So you have to adhere to what those standards are. So it's really important for us to understand what that data strategy is. So we may spend a lot of time with customers just understanding what are their actual data procedures. And the second area is, particularly in older companies, you have probably 10x more unstructured data that resides in SharePoints and email servers and things like that than does in structured systems. So one of the questions we want to ask companies is, what is the approach you want to take to structured versus unstructured data? Do you only want to leverage structured data for now, or do you also want to take advantage of how do we start to look at all of that hidden data and unlock that environment as well? And we're seeing, a migration, I think, from companies who initially focused exclusively on structured data to now companies asking, well, how can I leverage that unstructured data? What are the types of things I can do that also then provide a lot of guardrails to make sure I don't get in regulatory troubles there or have inadvertent data leakage around those things? So our team works with companies like that to put data strategies in place, whether that be through AWS directly, or we'll work with companies like Databricks and things like that to help them put data strategies in place to leverage that data. But it's the power, like you said, the garbage in, garbage out problem can get amplified as you start to leverage more and more AI and automations techniques around that. So the amount of time we spend with customers understanding their data strategy, understanding the frequency of the updates, how they manage it and how they govern it is really critical.
Excellent. Now, of course, for a lot of companies, when we talk about data problems, as you just outlined, we're talking normally about one or two systems. One of the challenges that I see, especially in the aerospace industry, is that we could be dealing with ITAR, we could be on US GovCloud, we could have a deployment on Mod ICE, we could have deployments where data sovereignty, as a national data sovereignty matters. We could be working in situations where we have end-tier supplier integration issues, and we could even still have people using pen and paper. So whenever you talk
nowadays,
about...
we have deployments in outer space. So we have people working at the edge out in outer space and in satellites developing data and streaming that live too. So the environment is getting more and more complex.
Yeah, and of course, like you say, when you start talking about space, we'll delve into that in a few moments, but you're also then looking at moving data in a way that you're able to understand exactly which data source it's come from. You've got all your normal OT problems, satellite one that's taking a picture of the target. How do I assure that it's being passed through all the other satellites to the ground? The thing is, it gets really complex very quickly. So AWS, I know, has security as job zero. So given the challenges that we see with state actors proactively targeting civil infrastructure to include aerospace and the sorts of infrastructure that space-based systems are designed to support in the first place, how is AWS tackling security as it pertains to the aerospace sector?
It's a great question, John. I'm really glad you asked that because, as you said, security is 100% job zero at AWS. So everything we do is anchored in how do we enable the customer to provide the most secure environment for their particular industry, for the geography they're operating in, and things like that. So we have a whole system of guidelines and recommendations we work with customers to allow them to encrypt their data, to provide data residency strategies. So, for example, I talked about Safran. If you want to keep your data in the French region, you can anchor that data in France and keep it in France and not have it transfer to other countries and things like that. If you're a US customer that has to comply with ITAR laws and rules, you can use AWS GovCloud, which is a fully US citizen supported environment, to anchor all your data in there. Even to the point where if you are a defense customer who has controlled data at the IL5 or IL6, which is top secret levels, we have environments for that type of data as well, very specific to that use case. So we're very familiar with understanding how to work from a security perspective, but also from a compliance perspective and how you report up to the regulators, because compliance is becoming a more and more pressing issue. As the US government rolls out their CMMC model and other countries roll out similar cybersecurity attestation models, it's important for us to work with customers to provide clear visibility for how our environment complies with those models, and then how we can make it easier and cheaper for companies to comply with those certification processes than they would have on their own. Because, as you know, John, a large customer that probably has a deep legal team, a deep compliance team that can help work with all those types of models. So, for a customer like Lockheed or Airbus or Boeing, they have compliance teams that understand how to do that intimately, and they're integrated with their government customers very deeply. But when you start to click down to some of the suppliers, a lot of those companies are small businesses that, they may not even have an IT department. They may have somebody who's good with computers that runs their systems, but they still are required to comply with those certification processes, particularly in the defense environment. And what we don't want to see is that those regulations start to become so burdensome and so hard for customers that it drives them out of the industry altogether. So what we've provided for a lot of those customers, particularly to CMMC, is a landing zone environment that allows sort of an easy path for customers to adopt CMMC requirements and become compliant out of the box on day one, and then provides a model for certification and attestation to the regulating agencies to allow them to continue to keep up with regulations, that they don't have to invest in all that infrastructure on their own because they know AWS has it from our perspective as well.
Right, now I've got two follow-up questions in that area. The first one I want to turn to is space, because you mentioned it first. So we often say aerospace, and the natural inclination is thinking your F-35s, your Boeing 737s, and those sorts of areas. But increasingly, space is no longer a realm of sci-fi. It's no longer a realm of pure military actors. We now see civil companies placing robots on the lunar surface. We see aspirations with Amazon itself launching hyper satellites at scale into space. So one of the things that strikes me, and I look for your insights into this, is that the way that we used to manufacture space-based systems in the past, of one system, specialist teams, everybody in white coats, dedicated to the building of these bus-sized units, really can't be the way that we get to 3,600 and whatever number of satellites being launched within a very short space of time. So how is the space manufacturing capability being compelled to adjust, maybe taking best of breed practices from automotive or others? How is it being compelled to adjust in order to achieve low cost, scalable manufacturing, or should I say lower cost, scalable manufacturing?
Yeah, I think it's not just space, but we see this emerging domain of urban air mobility with companies like Archer and Joby Aviation. So, those companies have business plans that don't require them to build 50 or 70 aircraft a month. It has them building thousands of airplanes a year, because what they want to compete with is sort of the Uber black market of the world and luxury or semi-luxury transportation. So when you talked about operating at scale at that level, you have to not only increase your output, but you have to do that at an affordability level that means a ride on a Joby aircraft won't be only reserved for the super rich. So what we've seen a lot of those customers do is start to sign partnerships with automotive companies, whether it be like people like Toyota or Stellantis, to bring in not just best practice techniques, but also a lot of the actual manufacturing capacity and things that those automotive companies have learned through decades of high volume production. And so what we're seeing those companies start to do is leverage each other's knowledge base, the innovation that's coming out of the UAM teams with the manufacturing excellence that comes out of automotive. So you're seeing that more and more and more happening. I expect that to continue.
That's a fantastic. I love this sort of cross-pollination of industries in that way. Now, one of the other things that you mentioned, which is, as a small business owner myself, I'm very appreciative of AWS for, but maybe you can just double click it for us. One of the barriers for small businesses entering into any contract, either with a large OEM or with defense, is often regulatory compliance. So how can small businesses leverage AWS in order to achieve at least some of that assurance without necessarily having to invest so very heavily in building it all from scratch?
I think that's the key success factor of becoming an AWS customer is, as you said, a lot of companies don't either have the cash or the knowledge or about how to build that infrastructure, and it probably isn't what they want to spend their time doing. They're looking to innovate on a product level, not to have a compute infrastructure that's the most compliant in the world. That's just not their core competency. So what AWS does is provide a fully secure infrastructure and compliant infrastructure of the cloud itself. So all of our data centers, all of our servers, all of our networking protocols, all of that has already gone through rigorous testing and certification by those bodies. And you can check on our website, the various levels of compliance that we represent. And then we help coach customers on their responsibility to secure their data in accordance for those regulatory bodies as well, because that's their responsibility, is to understand how they leverage and use their data. So we have a lot of free training availability. There's a lot of blogs out there that customers can learn and leverage and easily deploy those security techniques to comply with whatever the particular regulatory agency they need to follow in their geography and industry may be.
Well, thanks for that, Tim.
And that's true all the way down from companies, enterprise down to very small 1-2 person businesses. They may be operating on a free tier from AWS as well.
And it's important to recognize that final comment there from Tim, that it doesn't matter whether you're the world's largest company or the world's smallest. AWS is unusual in the hyperscaler world because the account teams are leaning out, they're helpful, and they want everybody to be supported. And what is more, most of the training, whilst it can be sometimes challenging to find, the truth is most of the training is on the websites, is in blogs, and the people within the business are genuinely approachable and more often than not willing to help. So Tim, maybe you can help me understand, because it's not just that people have to phone AWS. How do people get help from AWS whenever they're thinking about starting in this space?
As I said, one thing, John, we have thousands of partners that are available in every geography. So if people want to work with a local partner to help them get started, if you look at our AWS marketplace, there are thousands of partners out there to help you get started with things. With might be individual small consulting firms, they may be software vendors, they may be larger companies that are helping companies on board or provide training or resources out there. So it's not just AWS, it's the entire AWS community that helps bring customers to the cloud and help them innovate.